having me tonight. So my name's Jeff Evancho. I'm I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm an artist, a teacher, an administrator, a gardener, and I'm a maker. And throughout the course of my career, I've worked in construction. I've worked in landscaping. I've worked in antique restoration. I was a sculpture major, and I worked in a foundry. I studied painting in Italy. And I've also had extensive experience in arts and education. And all of these experiences have been seeds that have been planted in my life that have given me the knowledge and the courage to do things, to make things, to bring them to life. It's given me a sense of empowerment. I'd like to talk a little bit about this guy. He's also planted some seeds in my life. This is my pap. Pap's 102 years old. He still lives by himself in Turtle Creek, Pennsylvania. Some of the seeds that he planted in my life, when I said before I was a gardener, I'm a crazy gardener. I grow every fruit and vegetable known to man. Pap taught me how to can things. So I can tomatoes, I make hot sauce, I make and can sauerkraut. Pap taught me how to tinker and how to make things and how to build things. And if anybody knows anything about this generation, I'd say in the audience, we probably have some folks that have grandparents from the greatest generation, or parents from the greatest generation, or even great-grandparents from this generation. One thing that I know to be true about Pap was every time that I saw Pap, he was fixing something. He was taking things apart, putting them back together, whether it's a washing machine, the dryer, the blender. It didn't matter whether my grandmother was using them at the time. He would still take things apart, put them back together again. The lawnmower, that thing must have come apart and back together again a million times. And his lawnmower ran for about 30 years, if not longer. It's a little bit different than the situation that we have today. And I think the important thing to note that was different about that is that Pap was really good at slowing down and taking time to figure out how things work. He would take apart that lawnmower and he would look at it and understand how things are working in there, what's touching what, how they're connected, and he would figure it out. And that took time, and it developed a sense of understanding of how that lawnmower worked as a system. Every time he went back to that lawnmower, if something happened, he knew how to fix it because he understood how it worked. That made Pap an empowered maker. What I want to talk a little bit about is this concept of maker empowerment, that when we take the time to figure things out, to understand how they work, we become empowered. We can build things, we can make things, we can fix things. So that's also situated in this thing that's been kind of creeping across the country and across the globe called the maker movement. In 2006, on the West Coast, we had the first Maker Fair. And basically what's happened in the maker movement is at some point in time, the technology boom happened. And while that thing was emerging, it was meeting at the same time with the do-it-yourself kind of arts and crafts movement was happening. In 2006, the Maker Fair was a place where technologists and makers and craftsmen would come and they would show their work. And it crossed generations, youth and elderly. They were all there showing their work. And that thing has now taken across the globe. It's everywhere. Maker movement has also had deep implications for learning and implications for schools. You see it now, we have maker spaces everywhere. It's kind of created this makerspace arms race where all of a sudden schools are building these spaces to drive this type of learning because the school next to them are. So that as a concept, that this maker empowerment, we know that it's a really good thing. We know that this maker movement is crossing the country and crossing the globe. We also want to try to figure out what is it that's so special about that? When we take time to slow down, we become empowered makers. How do we bring that into schools? What are the implications for learning? So in about 2012, kind of frame what we have here. Project Zero is a research institute. It's a research institute out of Harvard's Graduate School of Ed. And in 2012, they sent a group of their researchers to the West Coast to study this maker movement because that's where it was born. Supported by the Abundance Foundation, they started to look at what was happening within that maker movement, and their first phase of research had some findings. From 2012 until now, there are these learning communities. We have one here, Agency by Design Pittsburgh, which it's been around for about 4 years. I co-direct that with my colleague Peter Wardrop. We also have Agency by Design that's still out on the West Coast called ABD Oakland. There's one in Washington, D.C., there's one in Hong Kong, and they're popping up all over the world. Each one of these learning communities is filled with passionate adults they care deeply about thinking about what this maker empowerment is all about. How do we create these opportunities for youth as well as ourselves? So what happened? What was the first phase of research? What Agency by Design found whenever they started to look at this concept of maker empowerment and what was happening on the West Coast, they found this. This is called the framework. And basically in the framework, it has 3 components: a sensitivity to design, maker empowerment, and this round thing we call the donut. And basically what the donut is are the core capacities. If you think back when I was talking about Pap was taking apart that lawnmower and he spent some time with it. Eventually he figured it out. That moment of figuring it out is the empowerment. Empowerment happens when these capacities become developed in our brain. We have the fundamental ability to look closely at things, to explore the complexity in things, and to find opportunity in things. As that's being developed, we talk about that as a sensitivity to design. The concept behind sensitivity to design is acknowledging that the entire world is designed. This event was designed, this room was designed, your outfit today was designed, the phone in your pocket was designed. As we become more sensitive to understanding that everything is designed and situated within a system, we start to develop that empowerment because we understand if we can understand this design of the system, we can change the design of the system. And we can change it for the betterment of ourselves and society as a whole. So what the donut basically is as we become empowered makers, we're developing this capacity to understanding the design world, becoming sensitive to it. When that becomes our mindset, the way that we think about and with the world, we become empowered makers, and we gain agency and the empowerment to do something about it. So how does it happen in schools? What are the implications for schools? Well, because Project Zero is a research institute and they've been studying learning about learning for the last 50 years, they've also developed things called thinking routines. And to kind of take it away from edu-speak a little bit, what a thinking routine basically is a routine that develops the way that we think. A simple one of my favorites, is a routine called What Makes You Say That? If I were to ask the audience, why is the sky blue? Someone might raise their hand and give me an answer, and I'll say, well, that's interesting. What makes you say that? If I do that over and over and over again, every time I ask a question, you provide a response to say, what makes you say that? Eventually, your brain tells you, this guy's going to say, what makes you say that? And you provide evidence. The routine there is designed to frame your thinking so that you provide evidence. Well, the same thing with these. These routines are designed to create the core capacities so we become empowered learners, so we gain agency. The most popular is parts, purposes, and complexities. If we think back to Pap again, he's taking apart that lawnmower. What he's really doing is he's studying the parts. He's thinking about what are the purposes of each one of those parts? And what are the complexities? How do those parts interact with each other and how do they work? When that becomes our routine, over and over and over and over again, we start to understand how systems work, how things work. If we know how things work, we can change them. And we can change them for the better. That's called maker empowerment. How many of you have ever fixed something? You've actually accomplished it where you fixed it. Something was broken and you fixed it. Or you built something. Or you solved a problem without the support of somebody else. That moment where you're like, yes, I did it. That moment is maker empowerment. What we're trying to do in Agency by Design, our learning communities, these adults, we're trying to capture those moments. And we're trying to spread those moments out across all content areas so that all children can capture those moments of empowerment in every content area all the time. So what Agency by Design is doing, these educators are coming together to think about this. In science, it's not about just learning about science. It's learning with science as a scientist would. In a math class, it's not learning about math. It's learning with math as a mathematician would. And when we build things as a builder would. Because learning is about doing. Maker empowerment is about creating the moments where we're doing learning and we're making it real. So Agency by Design Pittsburgh, we're about 25 organizations times 35 educators thinking deeply about this. How can we create those moments and how can we capture those moments? So what do? We meet once a month and we rotate organizations so that we can change our context as to how we think about it. These adults are planting seeds and providing these opportunities for youth. We come together and we share it because we also believe that if we can document that moment, if we can capture it with a camera, if we can capture it by listening to it, if we can capture that moment by writing it down, we're assessing it. And if in an era of high-stakes testing, if we can capture and assess the types of learning that we value most, it's extremely important. So what our colleagues do, they share these moments with each other to gain feedback and to gain ideas from each other. They also look for learning in the wild, is what we call it. And we walk through each other's classrooms and see if we can find those moments of empowerment, and we try to capture them through documentation. Again, because if we can document it, we can assess it. And if we can assess it, we're capturing the type of learning that values most. And we also design for learning. Now, I think there's an important point here. Traditionally, as teachers, we design for students. And what we've done is we've kind of turned that a little bit on its head. And rather than just designing for students, we design with students for learning. And I think it's so important that I'll say it again. We design with students for learning. Because in the designing with students is where the opportunity for empowerment actually happens. So that's what's happening here. We're designing with our students for deeper learning. So in a nutshell, what we're talking about here with maker empowerment is developing systems level thinking. It's about understanding how things work, learning how to think over what to think, and then gaining the agency to make change on that system. Because what we're really doing is we're preparing to create opportunities and plant seeds of empowerment for the next greatest generation, our children. Thank you.